Hello, everyone. This video is meant to be watched after reading the article, Effectively and Efficiently Reading the Credibility of Online Sources. If you haven't yet reviewed that, please pause, go ahead and take a look at that article, and then come back when you're ready to review it together and go over the important points. Once you come back, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get this in slideshow mode. There we go. Let's talk about some of the most important takeaways from this article as you prepare to do research for your final research paper. One of the biggest things that it talks about is critical reading. You might have heard this term before. A lot of times I hear students talk about this as reading in depth, paying attention when you read, taking notes when you read, and it is all of those things. It's focused, purposeful, and deep reading. But it also means something else, which you may not have thought about before. It means reading laterally, reading across many sources to judge the credibility of a source and the quality of the information you're finding online. Today, we live in a world of information overload. There is a ton of information on the internet. You can find somebody who is willing to support a crazy theory about almost anything. If you want to argue that donuts are UFOs, you can probably find somebody on Reddit who's willing to back that idea, okay? That doesn't mean that they're credible or reliable. It does make it funny, but there's a lot of in between. There's a lot of gray area, right? There's the donuts are UFOs crazy stuff that you automatically know is not credible. And then there's the credible stuff like library databases that has been vetted and peer reviewed and checked over and over again to make sure we know it's fact and not opinion. And then there's all this gray amorphous stuff in the middle that we have to navigate. And so part of this class is learning how to navigate this, not just for your final research paper, but also for life. Like, this is a skill that you can use in everyday life. You can help your parents out with it, help your kids out with it, help yourself out with it when you're navigating information online. And part of finding out if something is credible is this critical reading skill and reading across many sources to see, do these sources agree? Because if a source is a one-off, if it's the only source arguing a certain point of view, it's probably not well founded, okay? So if they're the only person saying that something is true, and there's 99% of people who have disproved that, you know, the 99% is probably more believable. That's what reading laterally means. Like, is there anyone else who sees it this way? Anyone else who's had this experience? Is this experience reliable and credible? So let's talk about some other things that might trip us off in our quest to find out what's reliable online. There's something called misinformation. And this is a little bit different from disinformation, though you've probably run into both online. Misinformation is false information, regardless of intent. This happens all the time. You might get something wrong by accident. Somebody posts something online that wasn't quite right, but they didn't necessarily have evil intent about it. They just messed up, you know, it happens. Disinformation is false information spread intentionally. And unfortunately, there are people who are doing this, right? It is less common. Most people are maybe accidentally sharing something they didn't realize wasn't true. But there's bad actors online who are looking to scam or spread disinformation that somehow profits them, okay? Intentionally. So the other thing that you need to know when you're looking at sources online is the difference between primary and secondary sources. You might have heard this terminology before. It basically distinguishes between primary source, which means the person was actually there, or it's the actual piece of writing that somebody wrote, and a secondary source, which is about a primary source. So there's a long list here about what a primary source is. It provides a firsthand or direct account of information, including photographs, video and audio recordings, letters, diaries, government documents, speeches, historical documents, pieces of literature, art, research studies, and interviews. So if I took a photo of something and I was there, or I took a recording of it and I was there, I'm a primary source. That video I took is a primary source. That's like straight from the horse's mouth, right? That is somebody who was there, an eyewitness. If I had a speech that I wrote, that document is a primary source. That is the speech itself. If somebody writes a story, a short story or a poem or a book, that piece itself, that work is a primary source. But most sources online are actually secondary sources, which are about the primary sources, okay? So one of the most common examples of this is like a news article that talks about a scientific piece of research. So the research that was done, let's say on diabetes, right? That study on diabetes is the primary source, like the doctors and the volunteers and the information that they wrote down, that's the primary source, okay? But the news article that's going to come out is not going to have all that information in the news article, right? They're interpreting the study. They're telling you about the study. They're writing a secondary source, or they are a secondary source if they're speaking about that study, okay? So secondary sources are about primary sources. They report on them. They include book and movie reviews, scholarly articles, news stories about scientific studies, and they summarize, interpret, and draw on primary sources in some way. Something to be aware of with secondary sources is sometimes they have like a take on it. Like if you are listening to a certain news source, you might know that it might have a certain political bend, right? So it might not be like totally in the center. You're getting a certain viewpoint, a certain interpretation, right? Same thing goes for all different kinds of things. So there's different ways to interpret poems or works of literature or art, and people are going to have different perspectives, right? So you have different viewpoints from different secondary sources. So it's important to know who wrote the secondary source or who is speaking and what their motive is behind what they're saying, because they're representative of a certain viewpoint usually, and they're not totally neutral, okay? Speaking of neutral, there is something called bias out there in the world. I'm sure you've heard of this. Everybody in the world has bias, and not all bias is bad. Bias is like the personal opinion or preference that makes it impossible to see an idea objectively. I'm biased towards my kids. I have 2 little kids. I think they're the best kids in the world. Okay. I'm biased against them, or like for that idea, right? But that's not bad. It's good for your own mom to be biased, right? And to love you more than any other kid and think you're the absolute best, right? That's great. So biased information is always skewed, like it's not necessarily reliable. My kids aren't the best kids in the world to every other mother in the world, but it's not necessarily like just plain wrong either. We expect it to be biased, right? So biased information, personal opinions are not always bad, but there's a type of bias that is not good, and that is confirmation bias. That is the tendency of human beings, and we all do it, we all have it, to actively search for, interpret, and retain information that matches their preconceived notions and beliefs. Okay, so this is our tendency to look for things that already agree with us. So for example, if I think my kids are the best kids in the world and I have confirmation bias, that means I would only pay attention or look for the things that they do well. Like every time they're great at something, or they have good manners or good behavior, I'm just like, oh, yes, they're just the best. Absolutely. But that's not very good if I'm not paying attention to any of the times when they have a tantrum or they're misbehaving or their teacher talks to me about their behavior, right? That would not be good if I ignored all of that and only saw the good stuff. That would be confirmation bias. I'm only looking for the things that already agree with my view, right? I'm not doing them a service. I'm not doing me a service. I'm not raising them right? So we want to kind of avoid this, or at least be aware of it. So whenever we have like a political opinion or a take on something ourselves, and we Google it or we search in the library databases for it, we already have a predisposition to look for information that agrees with us, okay? So if I feel very strongly about, pro-gun restrictions or anti-gun restrictions, right? Whatever my tendency is, I'm going to look for information that agrees with me online. So be aware of this. Whenever you are searching up a controversial topic, know that your brain is literally set to look for information that already agrees with you, okay? It's something biological that we're fighting against here. That's the way that we're programmed as humans. However, this has been made much worse recently by Google and other platforms that track your searching. so that if I Google a topic and my friend Googles a topic and a student Googles a topic and my husband Googles a topic like gun control, we all get different results on Google because Google tracks our behavior and already knows what I believe. So it only shows me the information that it knows I agree with because it wants me to have a positive experience online, wants me to easily find information that it thinks I want to see. Same thing for my friends, same thing for my students, same thing for my husband. But if we have different viewpoints, we never see the other person's results. And this is how we get into little filter bubbles of our own. And it's very problematic because we can't possibly imagine how somebody could have another point of view. Because if you Google it, all this stuff comes up, but that's only your results. Okay. So this is definitely made worse by the ways in which everybody's tracking information online. So just be aware of that and be careful. Okay. The library databases are better because they don't track your information like that. Okay. Or if you sign out of everything, you're on a public computer and you're not signed in, you can also get possibly more neutral results depending on who's been using the computer. Okay. All right. So all of these things add up to our main conversation right now, which is what is credibility or the ability to be trusted, right? So credibility itself is the quality of being trusted and believed in. It's trustworthiness. All right. I'm credible as your instructor because I told you I have a bachelor's and master's and PhD in English, right? And the school has checked that and they know that I do. So you can believe me, right? I went to school for 11 years. I'm credible in this. I know what I'm doing or talking about, right? So you are all credible in different things as well, depending on your experience and your expertise. Not everybody is credible in what they're talking about, right? So be careful, look out for those credentials, look into who the authors are of certain pieces online. Sometimes there's misleading information. I've seen people quote other people out of context, or they claim to have a degree that maybe they don't, or, they're bending the information. So this is, if you're going out on the World Wide Web, you have to check these kind of things and check if it's credible. So how do we know if something's credible? I was given this source from an older friend of the family on Facebook Messenger just a couple of years ago. And I'm sharing this and I'm not saying anything political about this content. Okay, so I'm not trying to rail on Obama here at all. I thought he was great. So just for for context here, but this is the message that she copied and pasted into my Facebook Messenger. There was no other information included. So this was it. I'm giving you the full thing, okay? And this is what it said. This coming Sunday, set your DVR for the Fox News channel at 9 p.m. Eastern. Maybe this is why the White House has been discounting Fox. Sounds like this could be history in the making. Someone may go down, either Obama or Fox News. It may be that Fox has been holding this information back due to the sensitivity of it and out of courtesy. But Obama has taken on Fox, and it appears they are ready to spill the ugly beans of truth about the background of this individual who has had an extremely radical past. This Sunday, Fox News is going to air a very important documentary about Barack Obama, Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. The report will go back to Obama's earlier days, showing even then his close ties to radical Marxist professors, friends, spiritual advisors, etc. It will also reveal details about his ties to Reverend White for 20 plus years, i.e., how he was participating with this man and not for the reasons he stated. The report has uncovered more of Obama's radical past, and we will see no one in the media is willing to put out there. It will be a segment to remember. Mark your calendar and pass this on to everyone you know. Sunday night, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. Democrat or Republican, this report will open your eyes to how your country is being sold down the road to totalitarian socialism under the cover story of global warming. If you care about the direction of our country, pass this notice on to everyone you know. Okay, so she just sent this to me in the last couple of years, right? So I'm suspicious immediately because it's using some radical language. I don't know who the author is of this. There's no author listed. There's no links to anything legitimate here. There's kind of extreme language going on. And most importantly, there's no date. Okay, so this coming Sunday, I'm like, what? When is this? Like, how long has this been circulating on the internet? So I Google it. I Google this message. I'm like, how old is this thing? It was as old as 2009, you guys. I was shocked. I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing has been going around the internet for over 10 years, just like, I don't know, being shared in faith, I guess, that this is actually happening. So this is a great example of a source that is not credible. And you might see some of those signs that I did right away too. You might have, your spidey senses go up for something's not right here, right? Pay attention to that, okay? Whenever those things, your spidey senses go off, look into it a little bit. Is there an author? Who are they? Are there links to where they got their information? Okay, what does that information say? Does it agree with it, or are they misquoting or misdirecting you? Is there a date, a time, like what is happening here? So make sure that you are checking these things. That person who's a friend of my family who's in her 60s genuinely didn't know that this was false, right? So we have an information literacy problem, particularly with older folks and then very young folks who might not have these skills quite yet. But you guys are probably in a good position to pick up on some of these things. And I'm here to say, capitalize on that, use your skills. I have one more example for you here. This is empirenews.net. I want you to take a look and see if you think this source is credible. Okay, so we have only hours after announcing separation from Lisa Bonet, actor Jason Momoa photographed holding hands with SNL's Pete Davidson. Okay, and it's empirenews.net. It's not a .org, it's not a .gov, and it's not a .edu. So I'm already suspicious, right? A .com or a .net is not necessarily reliable. It could be if they're agreeing with something that is reliable, but in and of itself, it should be something that you check into, okay? So let's go ahead and check into this here. Let me see. Okay, so here it is. Here's the article. I can click on it. You can see that the photograph is very photoshopped. Okay, so as soon as I click on it, I know this isn't real. The other thing, it does have a date on it, which is good. And it has a person who wrote it, whose name is Bob the Empire News Potato. But if I click on this to find out more about Bob, it just reloads the page that I'm already on, okay? So that's deceiving because I think it goes somewhere, but if you don't click on it, then it doesn't really go anywhere. It's a dead link. It just goes back to the page that you're on. It's like a closed loop, all right? If I look through the article, there's no sources to rely on here to look up. So there's nothing to click on, nothing else that they're referencing. So I can say pretty safely here that this article is BS, all right? So these are kind of silly examples. As you peruse the internet, I want you to use these skills. Check into the author, check into what kind of biases they might have. Be aware of your own biases, right? Read laterally. See, are there many sources agreeing with this, or is this the only outlying source that says this? Because then it might be a donut as a UFO case, okay? If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great day.